Hey, champs! I am thrilled to highlight one of our sponsors this month, the Sales Arms. Chris has been on our podcast a few times with my good friend and fellow consultant, Stephanie Bradley, and the Sales Arms are truly a game changer when it comes to handling sales outreach and retention for yoga studios and fitness studios. You may have heard our episode with Martine, owner of the home studio, on the show. She credits the Sales Arms for doing all the client outreach and monitoring every step of her customer journey. Listen to her in her own words.
What is so great with working with them is that they basically are in contact with everybody that comes into my studio and that's new, and they'll send them a text message and they'll get them engaged until they get people to come back in. That was the part where I was looking for help, and I was like, I need to upload something, and it's just a lot of time and effort that goes into this, and they are personal, so it's an actual person behind a text message, and it's not something that is automated. And that was important to me. What percentage of new person comes back in 30 days? And so mine was 15 and 20% prior to doing this, and now it's been up to 35 to 40%.
With Chris and the Sales Arms team in Martine's corner, she was able to focus on what she does best, and that's running her studio. So if you're looking to boost your studio membership without getting bogged down in sales calls and follow-ups, which I call with my clients daily detective work, and you have somebody else do the heavy lifting for you, go to yogabizchamp.link/TSA. So with our Yoga Biz Champ exclusive link, you get a direct booking with Chris, the owner, to have a chat. So again, that link is yogabizchamp.link/TSA. Hey there, champs. Welcome back to another episode of Yoga Biz Champ. I'm Michael J., your community yoga studio business coach, and I'm here to help you grow and thrive without losing that spark that makes yoga such a transformative practice. And if you've ever wondered how to create a truly welcoming environment for students of all ages, sizes, abilities, and backgrounds, today's episode is an absolute must listen. My guest is the amazing Jivana Heyman, founder and director of Accessible Yoga and author of several accessible yoga books. Jivana is on a mission to make yoga more inclusive for everybody, literally and figuratively. And we dive into what it means to break down barriers in yoga spaces, from rethinking our levels and class offerings to redefining the teacher-student relationship so that everyone feels empowered and respected. And we even get into how yoga and activism overlap and how you as a studio owner or teacher can build real community that genuinely supports your students. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of Yoga Biz Champ. I have a great guest today, Jivana Heyman, and he is the founder and director of Accessible Yoga, and that's an organization dedicated to increasing access to yoga teachings, supporting yoga teachers, and he's also the author of Accessible Yoga, Poses and Practice for Everybody, Yoga Revolution, Building a Practice of Courage and Compassion, and the Teacher's Guide to Accessible Yoga, Best Practices for Sharing Yoga with Everybody. His books, classes, trainings support yoga teachers and yoga therapists in finding ways to bring creativity and collaboration into their teachings while still respecting the ancient yoga traditions. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here today. A good friend of Shannon Crow who said we have to meet. So I'm really grateful for that introduction. And I'd love to know a little bit about Accessible Yoga. I'd love to know, kind of give me an overview of your journey. I always like to know what that initial spark was for you, where, you know, that spark where I've got to get some more of this in my life, and kind of the journey to where you are now and how and why niching and how you kind of serve your community.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Well, actually, my grandmother practiced yoga. And so when I was a child, she would practice every day, and I would love to practice with her. So that was kind of my first exposure to it. And then later I'm a gay man, and I came out in 1984. And that was during the AIDS epidemic. And I was living actually in New York and then San Francisco. And I got involved with ACT UP. It's an AIDS activist group. We were doing direct action, and it was very intense. And I think I got involved mostly just because I'm just a pretty compassionate person. And I just saw a lot of the people I was meeting were really suffering. I was going out and I thought it'll be a lot of fun, to be out finally. And I'd go and everyone I'd meet would be dealing with AIDS in some way. They were sick or someone else was sick or they were dying literally. And it was just such a shock at such a young age to be exposed to so much illness and death. And I found the group of activists really compelling. They just taught me so much about social justice and about the world. Like I hadn't really seen it that clearly before. And the way that marginalized folks get oppressed. Like I just hadn't seen it. And I saw it happening within the AIDS epidemic. And so I went back to yoga as self-care. Actually, I just went back because I was really struggling personally with all of that. And so I found a yoga teacher named Kazuko Onodera, and she really kind of took me under her wing and helped me kind of just pull myself back together. And then eventually I realized that I could share yoga with my community. And so I started teaching yoga just so I could teach for people with HIV and AIDS, and which is what I did. So I did that in San Francisco starting in 1995, which is 30 years ago this year.
Yeah, we're probably around the same age, actually.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, I definitely, saw that era too, for sure.
What's hard to express about that time is just like what I see as kind of a gap in our community. Like there's just not as many gay men slightly older than me around. Like it's like a whole generation that died.
Yeah.
And I just feel like I really feel their loss. And I feel like the rest of the world kind of has gone on. They're still with me. Like I think about, my best friend who died back then in 1995, my best friend Kurt, and I think about him all the time.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you lost a lot of people too. It's just
not a lot, but some, yeah, for sure.
Not a lot.
Yeah.
I think maybe because I was in San Francisco, it was like very intense time.
Yeah, I think Vancouver, not as much.
I see. Yeah. But I mean, yoga is so incredible in that way. It has so much potential. I think one of the issues is that we always think about this as a potential for physical healing, but really for deeper kind of healing, like to deal with grief and just like general angst that happens when you're overwhelmed or depressed.
Yeah.
It just got me through such a difficult time. And so I felt like I owed it to the world to share it, share what had helped me.
Yeah. So you found this teacher.
Yeah.
And how did that teacher change things for you?
She was very special because I was still quite young, so I was probably in my early 20s at that time. And she was Japanese American, and she still had a very traditional Japanese way of being, which was she wanted me to be her apprentice. It was like when I showed that I was committed, it wasn't enough to just like come to class. She wanted me to actually I started assisting her and helping in her garden.
Yeah, me too.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah. I feel back then there was such a thing as apprenticeships.
Yeah.
There were, teachers that had practiced for years. Yeah, I did a year apprenticeship with my teacher training wasn't a thing. I learned in the apprenticeship.
Exactly.
But I feel like that was also not just yoga. I lived with a hairdresser. There used to be hairdressing apprenticeships. There used to be so many different apprenticeships right now. And it's just different now.
It is. I know. It's too bad. It was really special. I mean, I was with her for 4 years, actually, of that. And it was, very personal. Like I would just go and garden with her and cook. And like, I feel like she was kind of reparenting me, to be honest, like showing me how to be an adult and also how to teach, so that really inspired me to go out and share more. Yeah. So I'm very grateful to her. And then she actually passed away quite a few years ago, but I don't know. Hopefully that's still available. I mean, I assisted with so many teachers too after that. So I think assisting is still a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
If people are like newish in yoga teaching, I think try and find a way to assist an experienced teacher is such a great thing.
Yeah, because teaching's about looking, right? It's about watching what's going on and seeing. And
yeah, and it's amazing to be in the role of assistant where you're actually not just a student and you're also not the teacher.
Yeah.
It's unusual to be able to be in that space, to see the interaction and see the dynamic and the relationship that's occurring there. I think it's really, really strong. It's a great way to learn. I assisted a lot of great teachers in the Bay Area at that time. And then I just kind of dove into teaching too. And I worked in a local hospital in the Castro in San Francisco. And I taught HIV/AIDS classes there for many, I think like 12 years. We had one group that kept going, through that time. And they taught me so much.
Yeah.
Those guys kind of showed me what accessible yoga is. Like they showed me what they wanted from the teachings, and it wasn't really like a fancy asana practice. They wanted a depth of spiritual understanding. They wanted to understand what was happening to them. A lot of them were facing very severe illness and many of them died. And so it just was much more like, what is the point here? Why am I alive?
Yeah.
The big questions that I think yoga answers so beautifully and that we don't always get around to. That really had a big impact on me.
What was the journey to really niching? Because you're super niche now, right?
I mean, that was it. Literally, like working with people with HIV and AIDS. I mean, that was my intention. I became a yoga teacher because I wanted to share yoga with people with HIV and AIDS. It wasn't like I just wanted to be a yoga teacher.
Yeah.
And so I guess my community inspired me to start. And I see some teachers doing that, that they feel inspired from their journey personally or because of the community they're a part of. They want to share with their community. And I think that's a great way. I don't even know if it's niching because to me, it's more just like service. It's like you just come from a place of serving, which to me is what yoga is all about anyway, right? Yep. So to be of service is to do your practice so that you can have energy to care for others. And that's what kind of happened to me naturally. I mean, it expanded, I guess, so that it wasn't just HIV and AIDS. I started inviting people with all different disabilities and older people to join.
Yeah. Can you explain to our audience what accessible yoga really means to you?
I mean, I actually think it means something broader than most people maybe think it means, because to me, it's means giving access to the teachings. To me, it's like making the heart of yoga accessible and sharing the fullness of the practice, which is why I talked about how my students with HIV and AIDS really, and many of my disabled students who have been facing a lot of big challenges have shown me that the more subtle and I would say spiritual teachings of yoga are actually what they're looking for. And I think that's not necessarily the case in a lot of contemporary practice that seems to focus on the physical. I think there are a lot of people out there who want the deeper teachings of yoga. And I mean deeper, it's not like, I just mean, like studying yoga philosophy, practicing meditation, learning pranayama and deep relaxation, like really working on your nervous system, working with your mind.
Yeah.
That's all I mean. And I think that part, more subtle part, I think is really what accessible yoga shares well. Many people think accessible yoga is just adapting the physical poses, but I think that's one little piece to me.
Yeah.
And that's fun. I mean, I love that. So it's just giving people access, and especially I'd say people who aren't normally recognized as part of the yoga community. It seems like over the years, and actually, I don't know if you've been teaching as long as me, but
a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be like yoga was for everyone. Yoga was kind of like an alternative, kind of almost hippie thing.
Completely.
And now it's more like this kind of like, I don't even know what the words are to describe it right now.
I see two things going on. There's kind of boutique-y franchise, kind of glossy things going on. And then there's still, I work with a lot of the true community studios that are still doing the really great work on the ground.
Yes.
You're teaching accessible yoga to a lot of teachers, and studio owners hire a lot of teachers, and you've been on both ends as a teacher, you've owned a studio. You could educate studio owners on how to incorporate being more accessible based on kind of your experiences. Yeah. Because I think our pre-chat, you kind of said you see it more happening outside of the studio. So kind of feel like this is an opportunity to educate a studio owner.
Yeah. I mean, we've created our own problem here, which is that I feel like the public image of a yoga studio is often an exclusive environment. And a lot of people are afraid to go there. I don't know if studio owners recognize the fear.
Yeah, so right.
Yeah.
I always said, and I've said it multiple times, the hardest thing is getting through the front doors the first time for a lot of people. Yeah. And I was always like, once they're through, I'll take care of you. I got you.
Yeah. And especially I think anyone who maybe comes from any kind of marginalized background. So whether you have a disability, if you're an older person, if you have a larger body, if you're neurodivergent, if you have any mental health issues, like all those things make it even harder. Like you have anxiety, or you have a hidden disability, like maybe you have a chronic illness that people can't see and you're afraid that people won't recognize that and really serve you. Or you have an obvious a mobility disability, like use a wheelchair, then maybe you literally cannot go in there. I just feel like there's a lot of obstacles for a huge portion of the population to access yoga in many studios. And of course, I know there's some really incredible places that prioritize accessibility. And I teach a lot of those at those places, and a lot of teachers who teach at those places. But I guess I would just first ask yoga studio owners to reflect on that question: is what are they doing to make their offerings accessible to most of the population.
Mm-hmm.
Because, by the way, if you look at what I named in terms of like people who don't feel like they belong, that's actually most of the population.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you're actually like excluding like huge numbers. Like older people or disabled people make up like a huge part of our population, and they could be your students. Like they could be coming to class. So I guess I would just start with a question. It's like a self-reflection process of looking at the physical space. Is it physically accessible? Looking at the marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Is the marketing accessible in terms of the imagery, the language I'm using? Is it clear?
Yeah.
Also, I would look at the types of classes that are being offered. Is there a real range of offerings?
Yep.
Are you creating a hierarchy there where it feels like physically advanced practice is more advanced yoga, and that those are people are somehow better than others? And I think that's a lot of studio spaces, even in the way we name our classes.
Level 3.
I think it's really wrong, because I've worked with so many people that are so advanced yogically, like are so evolved and don't have an intense physical practice. Like it's just not, there's really no correlation between those. And I say that sometimes that, outer ability doesn't equal inner peace, that there's no correlation between your physical ability and actually where you are mentally or spiritually.
Yeah.
Those are really different things. And I think we have to recognize that and maybe shift the way that we name our classes and talk about them. So it's not just the title of the class, but also how do we describe the content and how do we describe the experience of being there?
Yeah.
And, like I said, I know a lot of places do a great job at this.
Yeah. When you go into studio, hey champs, let's talk about behind the scenes hustle of running your yoga business. If managing your studio feels like a balancing act, it's time to check out our sponsor, Offering Tree. This all-in-one business platform handles website building, bookings, client management, and marketing workflows to help and add and retain more clients to your studio. Yoga Biz Champ listeners get 50% off the first 3 months or 15% off annual plans via the link in the show notes or by going to offeringtree.com/Yoga Biz Champ podcast. Studio plans start at just $100 a month and include a supportive community plus bi-monthly coaching calls with myself. Offering Tree isn't just a software, they are your studio business partner. And you do training, so you're talking to the teachers and the team, I'm imagining there. What's the difference? What comes up? What's the kind of result?
My trainings are very practical in terms of I really want to give teachers the skills they need to be able to serve all students. So I really focus on that question. Is like, what do you need to know and what do you need to be able to do as a yoga teacher to make your offerings available to anyone who comes to you and actually to be able to serve them in one class. So one of the things I'm really interested in is integrating spaces rather than segregating, which is what we're doing a lot.
Yeah.
We segregate people by physical ability in yoga, and I think that's a little bit dangerous. I think we learn best when we are in mixed groups of all different abilities. I think it's really amazing.
Yeah.
And I think the ability to have a mixed level class that's functioning is a result of a studio culture that is really healthy, that's focusing on embracing diversity.
Yeah.
Of course, we have a huge attack on diversity right now, and DEI is under attack.
Yeah.
But I actually think we can move in the opposite direction and create a culture that celebrates it. It's not just accepts people. Sometimes I don't like the word inclusion very much. DEI, this idea of inclusion, it feels like, oh, I'm going to let you in. Like I own this and I'm letting you in. It's just not how it is. It's about recognizing that we all have this. That yoga is foundational teaching is that we all share the same spirit.
Yeah.
So it's just the truth.
And I think when I had my studio, at first the studio was all about me. I taught most of the classes, but as it went along, it became more about empowering my teachers.
Right.
So I think, studios have an opportunity here to really, meet on a regular basis and really talk about these things and help empower the next generation of yoga teachers to be better. And the fact that you're going in there, I think makes a huge difference to open up the conversation.
I hope so. I feel like you, I've been teaching a really long time and I've seen a lot of things. I feel like I just want to share what I've learned. In fact, my last book, The Teacher's Guide to Accessible Yoga, it's pretty much all in there. If you don't want to train with me, you can also just read my book. It's basically goes through all the things you need to do and consider if you want to make your classes accessible.
Yeah, great.
I think that there's so much power here. Yoga teachers hold a lot of power and studio owners too. There's so much power in yoga. which is why I think we see so much abuse, because it's such a powerful practice. But I think that if we hold it correctly, it can be really transformational. And actually, it happens in community. And so I think studio owners have such a special job, bringing people together. It just doesn't happen enough in the world these days.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, it's a pretty amazing thing when we literally have four walls and people come in, they close their eyes, they lay down and relax, they don't speak. Like, it's just like, where in the world, other than, temples?
Exactly.
My intention when I had my studio was no matter where they were at, no matter what class they were coming to, as long as they left feeling better. Yes. That's all I cared about. As a teacher who was taught form, alignment, and all the things, the further I taught yoga, the less I cared about if your heel lined up with your arch or any of those things, as long as they weren't creating danger in their bodies. And something you said before was being able to teach a class where everybody feels accessible. And I think a lot of my studios do a beginner 101 course, like an 8-week signature series kind of course. And I got to say, someone that for 20 years has taught beginner series, that's the hardest class you're ever going to teach, because beginner gets you 70-year-old stiff people. It gets you different sizes. It gets you young, fit, flexy. And if you can learn to guide every type of being in that class to feeling good and feeling better in themselves, I think that's the magic.
Oh, yeah. I mean, teaching beginners is definitely the hardest thing to do. And I think there's two different kinds of yoga teaching. There's yoga teaching for ongoing students, and there's yoga teaching for beginners. Like, it literally is like a special skill, because there's so much information that you need to be giving them. And when you have ongoing students, it becomes a different kind of relationship. You know what I mean? And it becomes much easier to offer subtlety and support individuals within the group. It's just really challenging if you have a lot of new people at the same time. I think doing a series is a great way to approach it rather than push them in. Actually, my ideal scenario is that I'd have one-on-one sessions with new people, honestly, before they join the group. That I think is the best case scenario for welcoming people into you.
But like a little onboarding.
Yeah.
What are your goals? When do you want to get out of this?
Yeah. And to give them some individual support, at least through 1 or 2 sessions, and then they can join. Because I think it also gives them confidence to be able to be in a group. Because that's a lot of the issue here, like we talked about, is people not feeling welcome. But of course, one-on-ones can be expensive. But there are programs out there that do that, sometimes not in a studio, but sometimes in wellness programs or hospitals.
Yeah. Well, I think also sometimes, I always say there's different doorways into a studio. There's an intro offer, there's a course, what have you. But it can be simple calling a program what it is, yoga for anxiety, like a 2-hour thing, like just to get people in, and just calling those things what they are and inviting people to come play with that, I think can be really big.
Also, I just like any title that talks about the content. I think that's really nice. I think that's a better way approach, like yoga for strength or yoga for flexibility, whatever it is, I think is more helpful than levels.
Yeah. Although I did, for some of my owners, calling it what it is, slow flow, gentle flow, things like that just really, this is what it is. But I think along that, and I just had this conversation with a studio yesterday, it's great to call it that, but you've got to make sure all the teachers know what that means and also what it doesn't include. So, like if one person goes to Monday's slow flow class and it's all gentle, there's no sun salutations, and then they go to Thursday's class and they're slamming a sun salutation in the middle there. It's like there's a disjoint, right?
That's for sure. That's quite hard. I think that's one of the challenges of owning a yoga studio, is really managing other teachers, because, everyone has their own experience of yoga and of teaching yoga, and it's hard to get them all on the same page. I think a lot of people are teaching from their experience, which makes sense. But I actually think that, we can't just teach from our physical experience. We have to be able to observe students and recognize that many people are having very different experience than us.
Yeah.
Which is why I always struggle with that idea of like, if you don't practice it, don't do it. Because I also think, well, actually, that's not what teaching is about. Teaching is about observation and really being sensitive to other people's experience. So I think being able to get out of your experience and to really, really focus on what someone is doing is essential for teaching yoga. And I don't know if we talk about that enough. The skill of teaching, you know what I mean? Like teaching something isn't just about embodying it. It's actually about communicating and observing.
Yeah. The words that I'm saying, is that happening in front of me?
Yeah.
And it is observation. I know as a long-time teacher, I can teach a class of 40 people and globally look across the class and be able to say, hey, let's take a look at this.
Yeah.
Like, this is what's going on. And I think that takes time and skill. But for me, you're absolutely right. The observation is a huge part of that.
And then the communication skills themselves, which I think sometimes are lost, like really understanding the language we're using. Like, are you speaking in first, second, or third person? Like, are you saying, I'm moving my arms, move your arms. Let's move our arms. Like, which phrasing do you use?
Yeah.
Very different feeling to each one. And are you demonstrating everything? Which level or variation are you demonstrating? Because students will want to do what you're doing. Like, there's so much that goes on in teaching yoga beyond the words, but even the words themselves, that has a huge impact. And then, like, in a way, what is your relationship to your students? I think that is another question, is like, are you just performing? Are you just on stage?
Yeah.
Can they speak? Are they allowed to ask a question? Like, I don't know. There's just so many questions to me that come up around that. Like, what is the role of a yoga teacher? And how do we question that ourselves? How do we put ourselves out there as equal humans who have some knowledge, recognizing that the students also have knowledge? They also have knowledge about their bodies and their experience and their sensations that they're having. How do we come together in a more positive relationship? It is a relationship.
It is. It's all relationships. To me, that's all it is.
Yes.
I'm hearing you say adapt. Hey champs, I want to spotlight our podcast sponsor and someone I consider both a friend and a trusted expert, Mitch McGinley from Boutique Fitness Brokers. He's been on my podcast multiple times. He's a former yoga studio owner just like us. Mitch and his wife successfully sold their studio just like I did, and now he helps others do the same. So if you've heard my conversation with Jill Agonias on this podcast, she sold her studio for well over asking price thanks to Mitch's guidance. Whether you're thinking about selling your yoga studio for top dollar or you're looking to buy an existing studio, and let me tell you, that can be a great head start instead of building from scratch. Mitch is your go-to guy, seriously. He understands the ins and outs of the yoga industry, from valuation to finding the right buyer or seller. Plus, he's been right where you are, so he gets it. I'm always talking about building a profitable business that can be sold or carried on. My former studio is in its 22nd year now, and it's under its third owner, and I consider that a legacy. So if you want to explore your options for buying or selling, head over to yogabizchamp.link/BFB to book a no obligation chat with Mitch himself. And trust me, it's never too early to start planning for your yoga studio's future success. Again, that's yogabizchamp.link/BFB. Classes, you like it across the board. Are you seeing studios or places maybe getting certain props or chairs or...
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I feel like every yoga studio should have chairs available all the time.
Yeah.
I don't mean that they have to be Iyengar chairs just for Iyengar classes, but I mean for seated yoga, so that you could welcome someone in who wants to practice in a chair, or potentially have a whole portion or a part of your class be seated. Because I think there's such benefit in chair yoga, and I think it's to bring that in as like a normal part of our practice, and just another format. Because I think it empowers people to practice when they're seated, like if they're at work or if they're sitting on a bus or something. It's like there's so much power there, and it also welcomes a lot of disabled folks or older folks who need to be in a chair into those spaces, and just having them around. And of course, all props. I think one of the most misunderstood things about props is that we judge them in a way. They're just neutral.
It's like cheating if you're using a
prop. Right. I mean, that's just incorrect. Props are actually neutral.
Yeah.
They don't make something easier or harder. It's totally dependent on that moment, the way it's being used.
Yeah. I think one of my skills as a teacher was really helping my students make the choices that work for them and giving full permission. Be here, here, or here, giving options. I wanted everybody to feel successful. No matter where they were, I wanted them to feel.
That's beautiful.
Whatever level.
Yeah. But I think that's about also giving them agency. So I talked a lot about that word. Agency is a sociological term that has to do with kind of taking back our power the choice to make, what we do with our bodies and how we do it. And I think a lot of yoga classes remove our students' agency. So I feel like that's what you're talking about, is you're trying to give that back, to make choices, to feel powerful. I mean, that's what yoga is all about,
Yeah. And I truly, at my studio, I had every age.
Awesome.
I think my age was actually 40, 50, up. And I think that's truly accessible because I didn't really attract the young, fit flexies. That wasn't, I think I strived for them, but that just wasn't the vibe. It was just a very comfortable, no matter age, size, what have you. And I think my teachers also represented that as well. And I think that's
important.
Yeah.
I think that the teachers you have will attract students that connect and relate to them, so that's really important to recognize who you're hiring as a teacher.
Are they in alignment too? In alignment with the vision of the studio, I think is super important.
Exactly. And because I think there's a danger in trying, what I've seen some places do is they try to bring in a popular teacher, but that teacher may not really be in alignment with the studio culture. And then it doesn't, I've seen that happen a few times where, there's another popular teacher in town, you invite them in, and then it doesn't really, they don't bring their students because the students don't feel like they're part of that. It's really about community building, which is interesting because in a way, it's a form of activism. Like when I was involved with ACT UP way back when, we did a lot of direct action that was quite intense, but a huge part of it was actually community building. It was about getting people to do stuff together. And I think that's the main thing that I saw connecting activism and yoga teaching was like group activities and how you can make people feel connected and powerful and that they have choice. And yet we're coming together in some way. There's a connection there. That community building piece is maybe the most important part of studio ownership because people are isolated in our cultures. And I think we really need to find ways to address that. It's a huge health hazard right now, the amount of isolation that there exists in the world.
Yep.
And to be able to bring people together is huge. So often I think students were coming back to my classes for their friends, just to see each other, right?
Yeah, my 11 o'clock slow flow class, those ladies showed up, 30 of them every week, and they went for lunch afterwards. And, that was part of their routine and their connection.
But that also helped them with their health too, by the way. Like that was huge.
Oh, yeah, that's social. Yeah.
Because I just feel like isolation is something that's not talked about enough in yoga. I think that we have a really powerful tool to address isolation.
Yep.
And that's why I particularly speak around with accessible yoga, because in accessible yoga, it's often populations that are more isolated, like disabled people or older folks who might have less social interactions because they can't do as much activities. So if you do create a yoga class where you're inviting any marginalized folks and they're coming, I think you have to recognize how important that is.
Yeah.
The effort people are making to come. I remember many students who were like, this is like literally the only time I leave my house each week is to come to this class. That is amazing.
Yeah. It is. And I think the repetition too. So I go to a little community center here and I have a favorite little Wednesday night class that I love that just feels like you're dancing for an hour.
Yeah.
But what I've noticed is every time I've been going for a few months, I've been by myself, and then one person says hello.
Yeah.
Then the next week, 2 people say hello. 3 weeks later, someone tells me their name.
Yeah.
The next week I walk in, they say, "Hey, Michael." And and it just has slowly built up to, I feel part of that community now.
Yeah. And actually, I think studio owners can focus on that.
Yeah.
And do it consciously. Because I think a lot of times there's some studio owners who are naturally community builders and they have it easy. Some aren't, and they need to really work on it. But there's things you can do,
100%.
You can encourage your teachers to focus on having students introduce themselves, create a little space for talking before or after class, like really to create more of a connection.
Yep.
You can celebrate your students in some way. You know what I mean? Like you can have student of the month or whatever it is. Like there are things you can actually do to create culture. You could have book clubs. You can have other activities in this space. Anything where you're going to have people socialize is going to help. If you bring in that social element, it'll build your studio tremendously.
Yeah. And for the folks listening, the best one is if you're busy on the front desk, a studio always has a super fan. There's always those people that are there early, they're excited, they talk to everybody, and you're busy on the front desk. A new person comes in, you check them in, you welcome them, and then you say to that super fan, "Hey, Susan, can you show such and such around?"
Yeah.
That tension's gone away. They have one person that's going to introduce them to a second and third person, and they already know the way that it's just the most non-intimidating way to come into a studio.
That's a great idea. Yeah, I think we need to do that more. We need to consciously create community in yoga space.
The other thing we have a space that, you said we can do good work with a space. And, mine, I've talked about this a lot, so I won't go into big detail, but mine was hospice was my charity of choice. Mm-hmm. I was touched by hospice. I was on the hospice board for 5 years, but it was meaningful to me.
Yeah.
And because it was meaningful to me, we raised $40,000 over 10 years.
Wow.
So I think the studio owners have a space to do good things in the community. That's a powerful thing, I think, too.
Yeah. I mean, owning a studio changed my life, actually, because what happened was I had just moved here to Santa Barbara, and I ended up becoming co-owner of the Santa Barbara Yoga Center, which is a beautiful studio that's still open. It was such an amazing space. Like when I was in the physical space, I thought, wow, what could I do with this? And it occurred to me to offer a conference. And so we had our first accessible yoga conference in 2015. And that actually really changed my life because I ended up creating this platform for accessible yoga. Like people doing this work all over the world came together, and we actually started offering them all over the world. We had conferences in person all over the place, and then we went online during COVID, and we actually recently just stopped and just switched to these trainings and series we're doing. But those years of doing those conferences built a community for me of people that I'm connected to. Because I think of accessible yoga as a community that's quite huge. Many people who have been doing this work long before me, and people doing it all over, serving their communities, basically just from their heart. And it was so great to come together, in that space. So like having that space totally shifted my understanding of what I could do.
Yeah.
I love that. I love the idea of doing service work too. So actually, if a studio does something, you can do that like as a community. You can create like a fundraising event, you know what I mean? Or you can choose like a charity to donate to. I think there's so many things you can do. It takes a lot of work. That's the part that sometimes studio owners don't realize they have to do.
I think they do. Everything takes a lot of work.
Yeah, but I think it's the work of community building. It's the best marketing.
Yeah, it is. I always say that we were always in the newspaper with a massive giant check handing over a few $1,000s over to something, right? That was always...
There you go. That's amazing.
I always say that wasn't the intention. The intention was to do good work. The byproduct of doing good work is you get recognized for doing good work in the community. Yeah. And I'd love to kind of wrap this up, and I'd love to just hear your thoughts about how you think studio owners can incorporate this a little bit more, and then also what offerings you have to help teachers and studio owners.
Yeah, well, like I said earlier, I think studio owners can reflect just on what they're currently doing, and then consider a few small steps you could take, to reflect on your physical space and how you can make it more welcoming, to look at what obstacles might exist. There's a theory called universal design, which people may not be familiar with, which is about creating a world that makes access a priority rather than a second thought. And so universal design is based on this idea that we can look at, everything from, often it has to do with architecture, but sometimes it's like how we schedule public transportation and people's work hours and everything. So that, meaning that you build space prioritizing access rather than as a second thought. So look at, is there a way for people to come to your studio? Like, is there a bus line that goes there? Are you offering classes during times when people maybe are off work? Is your language accessible? Do you have financial structure in place to make it financially accessible, right? Like, could it be tiered pricing or some classes that are by donation or a scholarship fund?
Scholarships,
Yeah, to pay for people. So I just think there's a lot of reflection you can do to work on, I think, first educating yourself about accessibility in general. Recognize that it can be a leap because people have a lot of fear or maybe just feel unwelcome in your space, and consider what can I do to address that. And know that it takes time. It's an evolution, I think. It may not happen overnight. And also to consider working in the community. Like sometimes it can be nice to actually offer classes in other locations. Even if you have a space, you can still offer a class at a community center.
Yeah.
I don't know, just finding a place where it's still your class, but it's out there.
Yeah.
And it can help to bring people back.
I love that.
It can be really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Anyway, basically what I do is accessible yoga trainings. I mean, I train yoga teachers in making their offerings accessible, like so that whoever comes to them could be served by them. And it's mostly about adapting asana, but there's a lot around other aspects of accessibility and what particular communities might need. Like, what does it really mean to teach in a trauma-informed way? What are some other obstacles to access? And then I offer a bunch of other shorter courses that are more like workshop series where I platform other teachers who are doing amazing work. Like we do restorative yoga, making restorative yoga accessible is a series we offer where we look at, is restorative yoga accessible for all different people? Like what are some obstacles?
If someone can't get on the ground.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Can you do it in a chair?
Yeah. Or
on a couch, for older people or for people with larger bodies, can they do restorative yoga and how? So that's the kind of thing we do. But yeah, mostly I'm just here to help yoga teachers mostly and studio owners to reflect on, I guess this is what I would say. Are you sharing yoga in a way that is in alignment with the yoga teachings?
Yeah.
Right. Which these are universal teachings that apply to all of us. They're about seeing our universal connection. And so it's like, are you actually teaching and operating your business in alignment with the values of this thing that you're actually offering?
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes we get a little lost in doing so because it's hard to navigate capitalism with a spiritual focus.
Yeah. Where can folks find information on your trainings and also your books? We'll put them in the show notes too.
Okay, thanks. My books should be available anywhere you get books. And I'm at accessibleyoga.org or jivanaheyman.com.
Yeah.
I post a lot on Instagram. I offer a lot of free webinars. Like I have one on Monday, or they're just ongoing. Almost every couple of weeks I have a free. I love doing stuff for free so people can sign up without having to take a training.
Fantastic. What's your Instagram?
Jivana Heyman.
And tell us something about you that most people wouldn't know.
Well, that's hard because if you read my books, I share a lot.
Okay.
But if you read my well, I was a professional gardener.
Ah.
When I couldn't make a living teaching yoga, that's what I was doing for a long time. I was also a reporter. So I feel like both writing and gardening are influence in my life.
That's where you connect with Shannon Crow because she's a gardener too.
Exactly. She and I talk about gardening way too much. And it's funny because we live in such different climates.
Yeah.
She lives in the far north.
She's in snow right now.
So like almost nothing works. She actually visited me once here and it was funny. Yeah, there's a very different climate and gardeners so specific, like to where you live. But to me, nature is my greatest teacher. So gardening is just a way to connect with nature. And that's another kind of yoga.
As a geeky person here, is there any tools, tech tools or business tools? Like what do you use that you love that helps run your business?
I mean, what I've been thinking a lot about is my team, to be honest, and how much I rely on other people.
Yeah.
I found, it took me a long time to invest in my business and actually hire other people.
So hearing that, yeah.
And now I have a team of about 5 people who work for me, and it's incredible what they do. And I mean, they use a lot of tools. I couldn't even name a lot of them, but
yeah,
I realized I just had to recognize my own limitations. Like I used to do it all myself and it limited my reach. And so as I started to grow the business of accessible yoga, I recognized that other people do it better.
I hope that yoga studio owners and yoga teacher dreamers are hearing that because I feel like that's been the theme of my last 2 weeks in coaching, in conversations, and in my life personally. So one of the things that Shannon Crow has helped me with, I'm giving up editing of my podcast. I've done it for 4 years just because I can do it. Should I do it?
Exactly.
Is that best use of my time? And I think for yoga studio owners too, it's the same thing. It's like, you can't do it all.
Right. I mean, I could do it all.
But you can't move the needle forward as much.
Right. It's going to limit me in ways that I don't even see. I mean, that's the thing is you don't really see what you don't have yet. You know what I mean? It's hard to imagine sometimes that it could be different. And I think a lot of this work to me is imagining and just kind of allowing there to be a space of like an unknown and a potential.
Yeah.
I think that's what yoga offers us. Like just, the unknown. It's there for you.
Last question. If you were a yoga pose, what would you be and why?
If I was a yoga pose? That's funny. The cover of my latest book, I'm doing I don't know if you can see, I'm doing a tree pose. So I would say probably that one because I love that pose. I put a block on my head and I practice. Tree is like my favorite because I love nature. So trees are like my teachers.
Yeah, rooted.
Yeah, you're rooted, but you're also in the world, right?
Yeah. I also have to say we have something in common. I saw one of your posts where you did something couch yoga.
Yeah.
And during my teaching heyday, I think I still have it somewhere. I had a whole, 20, 30 minute sofa yoga routine.
Awesome. Yeah, I am really into that right now. I'm pushing hard on that because I feel like it's this unrecognized tool of the couch.
It's great. You can do inversions on it.
Exactly.
You can do back bends on it. You can do hip openers.
It's incredible. You can also do chair yoga, like a lot of the seated practice you can do, and then recline. And so for a lot of people who like chair yoga, I say you might as well work on the couch because you can also get a reclined. I actually just did a free class for Yoga Journal. So I can link to you if people want to watch it. It's like a half-hour session.
Yeah, send that. I'll put that in the show notes for everybody to watch. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you so much. It's very nice meeting you. Thank you for sharing with our audience, and grateful for our conversation today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in, champs. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It really helps me out a lot. And if you're ready to open your own studio or grow your current one, visit yogabizchamp.link/podlink. Again, that's yogabizchamp.link/podlink to book your free strategy call with me and explore my Starter Studio and Grow a Studio packages. And you'll also get access to all of my free Yoga Biz Champ resources there. And you can also check out the video content on YouTube for more insights, and follow me on all social media platforms at Yoga Biz Champ. See you next time.